our speaker today is Ben Voss, and we first became acquainted with Ben through his talks to the Nashville chapter of the Amnesty International, which Julie's a member of. His presentations demonstrated that he's definitely in tune with social media and knows how to get a message out directly and quickly. So please make welcome Mr. Ben Voss.
All right, thanks to all of you. I want to just check real quick, because we'll be doing a little bit of training and hands-on as well today. So quickly, how many of you have a personal Facebook account? Everybody. How many of you have an account for the organization you work with or for? Most everybody. Twitter? What? You're not on Twitter? That's pretty much my message. Shame on you for not being on Nashville. So, would you be interested? Anyone who's not on Twitter be interested in joining Twitter today? Who has a cell phone with them?
Actually, I think I've joined, but I can't remember what
You
my
don't remember.
password is. Totally.
So that's part of it too. Yeah, I have that myself. I have a condition called CRS. I can't remember stuff. So yeah, deal with that too. Well, I wanted to start out by just blaming Hermes for the whole problem to begin with. Those of you who know about Hermes know that he was the Greek god of communication, the messenger of the gods, right? But he was also a trickster and a thief, and so when he would deliver his messages, he would deliver them in a way that the meaning might not always mean what you think it might mean. And I think when we look at religious diversity and the reality of differences of opinion and the ways that we can become violently angry with each other over those differences of opinion, the ways that we can dehumanize one another, I think that's a great metaphor when we think about Hermes and the fact that we're all trying to communicate a message, we're all trying to get to the truth of what's it really all about. But we end up getting stuck because the messages don't always come through as clearly as we'd like them to. One of the biggest questions, when you have a messenger, a Hermes type of a figure, someone who mediates between people, and I think all of us serve in that role to some degree, there's the dilemma of trying to be faithful to the intent of the person whose message you're trying to represent. You're trying to make that message present. But you also get stuck because you're trying to present it in a way that people can understand. I come out of the Calvinist tradition, and Calvin talks about how in Scripture God lisps to us. He speaks to us in baby talk. God's ways are so far beyond our ways, and yet he lisps to us. He talks to us in baby talk in a way that makes sense of these complex and inscrutable truths and realities. And so that's one of the dilemmas I think we all run into. That's part of what I want to talk about today, and the broader question of how do we use social media in a way that communicates truly and effectively what our intended message is meant to be. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Hopefully have some time for questions. But I want to encourage you all to feel free and use your cell phones to tweet about this meeting. It's one of the ways we get our message out, right? You can use Twitter on your cell phone. It's really easy if you get it set up through your cell phone carrier. How many of you have free text messages on your cell phone? Some of you do, some of you don't. It's worth it in the sense that this allows you to, send and receive messages in real time. Many of you are probably aware, one of the things that I'm very interested in is how Twitter has been used in Egypt, in Tunisia, to communicate messages that are subversive to power structures, communicating in ways that help to get around the blocks that are put up in terms of official communication, but still allow people to find ways to communicate in sort of an underground way. It's the old passing notes in class phenomenon that we're just now doing with much better technology. And so you can send a text message to 40404, and that's the Twitter number. If you wanted to join Twitter today, you could literally just say 40404 and just hit start, and it would ask you some questions, and you could set up your profile, and zippity-doo, you're ready to go. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm BenIntn, BENINTN, and keep up with what's going on there. I do blog at publicsanctuary.com, which is a place where I'm hoping to develop a place where people can talk about matters of faith and religion in public life. And so it's something that I'm interested in and curious about also. I want to just ask a few questions to consider about communication in general. These are just things that I was reflecting on as I was thinking about what we want to talk about today. First of all, this is, I think, a fundamental question about religious communication in particular, is how do we take what is old and make it new? How do we take historic truths and make them contemporary? What do we do to take things that are are old and to renew them, to make them new again, to breathe new life into them. How do we preserve what is good? How do we keep what is good, what is meaningful to us? Again, one of the things that communication does, it represents, it makes present again. I'm apparently, hello, being presented for perpetuity now on camera today, thanks to Dale and his work to be able to get this up online. And so, we have ways and means now to capture data and information digitally, to share that data in real time, and in ways that we don't even fully understand how to make it work. And we're still trying to catch up, I think, with the technology in many ways. So how do we preserve what is good? How do we preserve what is true? And sometimes those things are not always, what's true is not always good, or it's not always what we like to be good, and so we get stuck in that way too. How do we tell the truth without sugarcoating it, and how do we get our message out in a way that is faithful to the reality of the situation, but does it in a way that tells our story? What's the relationship between words and things? Between the words and the things that we're trying to describe, and I think all of us have that struggle from time to time of trying to be poetic, and how do you capture in words things that are impossible to say? And so often we end up saying, it's kind of like this, it's kind of like that, and it's kind of like this, and so we get into metaphors and we're trying to find ways to communicate, to get to reality, but we never quite get there. Another question is, how do we represent what is unseen or absent? I'm missing my daughter. I'm not spending as much time with her these days as I'd like to because of my work schedule and travel schedule and things like that, and so we're Skyping, me and my 3-year-old daughter, and I think it's so cool. My 3-year-old daughter will always live in a world where the TV talks back to you. It's just the most natural thing in the world for her. She'll, Daddy, I want to talk to Grandma and Grandpa on the TV, and she just thinks that happens. You can just kind of call them up and they'll be there. And for me, as someone for whom losses, my grandmother died when I was 12, and it was one of the things that really shaped who I am spiritually, because I was like, well, where is she now, right? And so those questions, I think, are really important to human existence in general. How do we take what is unseen or absent? How do we represent that? How do we make that present? And that's part of what I think communication and social media can do. There are also some questions about community. How do people with different viewpoints find common ground, find agreement? How do we respect our differences but still find ways to communicate with each other? Whose language are we going to adopt, right? In fact, that's another thing we talk about with Twitter is hashtags. Everybody familiar with hashtags? Anyone know does anyone not know what a hashtag is? Okay, so for those of you who do not know, hashtags, it's just the number sign, so you I think this might work. You would just, do this, and you could say, for instance, now if you add that to a tweet on Twitter, then you provide an instant way to crowdsource your information. You can now, if we all use RCC Nashville as our hashtag to just, when we have meetings or things we want to talk about, or hey, I think this is significant to this group. Now I just made this one up. You can do whatever you want to. But you then have a way within Twitter to search based on those hashtags, and you can instantly grab all the ones that have the RCC Nashville tag on them. So, what I've just done is create a language that we can all speak now. This is a little code, secret code word that we can use. And so whose language are we going to use? I just made this one up. There's any number of other ones that would be just as good. Maybe RCC Nashville already stands for something else. I don't know. But, that's one of the things we have to look at in terms of when we're communicating. How do we find a common language? How do we get people to adopt that language or to adopt that way of speaking? And if they think about Twitter or Facebook as means of communication, one of the big questions that I run into all the time with the churches I work with is how do you get your 50-something-year-old members to get on Facebook or Twitter and to actually use it and remember their passwords? And it's an important question, right? You have to, what part of the job of communication is not only to put the information out there, but to put it out there in a way that people can access and use in their everyday lives. Which is why for me, with my little smartphone here, this is great because I can, catch up on what my sister is up to, and she lives in England, and I can, again, my 3-year-old daughter I can push a couple buttons and Skype with my sister who's in England, and my little 3-year-old can sit there and talk to Aunt Erin. How cool is that, right? But it's almost, in a way, it's too easy, right? That's the other dilemma we run into, because while in one sense it's great, we have this plethora of information and resources and access to information we never had before. There's also the question of dilution of our message. I mean, how do you make yourself heard, right? How many of you have this problem? I have this problem. It's like maybe I'm just a question of my insignificance or inadequacy in the universe or something. But, you know, how do I make my message heard in a world where it's so much noise all the time? And how do I do it without just becoming more noise? I don't know, right? I mean, it's not an easy one to answer, but I think that's one of the fundamental questions we have to ask ourselves in terms of communication and community.
That's why we haven't done it yet.
You're just, yeah, you don't feel like
We don't feel
it's not a
how
purpose.
to make it meaningful to people.
How do we make it meaningful? Right,
Without
exactly.
just flooding their inbox with more
Right.
stuff, you know.
There's another whole set of questions is that, you know, if I've got my Facebook notifications set up so that every time somebody posts something on my wall on Facebook, it sends me an email, well, then I've got 130 emails a day coming in telling me that somebody's poked you. Right? Okay. All right, great. What does that mean? What do I do with that? I usually just delete it. So, yeah, all of us have to have those questions about, you know, what language are we going to adopt? What sort of language are we going to use? How do we share that as a community? Another really important question, again, getting into this piece about my sister in England and my daughter in Nashville, and how do we all communicate with each other, is how does physical presence matter in community? And, you know, again, for me, coming out of the Christian tradition, one of the things that I believe is that God showed up in human form in history, in time. And if I believe that that's true, then I believe in some way that physical presence matters. But this is the other thing that's tricky. Okay, the Christian tradition tells me that Jesus, when he showed up in bodily form, was fully God and fully human, but it wasn't an exhaustive revelation, right? There's still even more to God than just that person. And I think we run into the same thing with, you know, our communication in you know, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter or whatever idiom we use, blogs, is, you know, we're trying to present truth and present information, but you can never really say it all, can you? You know, and there's always more to say. There's never, you know, enough words. Well, then you could just spend all your time talking about the things you're going to talk about talking about.
Hey, there was something I just was thinking about, like in the last few days. The final verse of the Gospel of John, and Jesus did and said many other things, but all the books in the world could not begin to contain
exactly
what happened. So.
It can't even comprehend. It can't even begin. And so, again, in terms of that question about the relationship between words and the things that they describe, we want our words to get out of the way so that the truth can come out. So how do we do that in a way that's elegant, that uses as little energy as possible, but presents what we're trying to present? Another question I think we run into is how do you maintain a common purpose, which is kind of the cat herding question. Anybody who's a pastor or you know, person who's trying to communicate to a group, you know that it's a different thing, the one-on-one conversation where you're tracking with the person, there's eye contact and head nodding and whatever, versus the one-to-many communication where you're preaching a sermon or you're speaking to a group and you're trying to make sure, you know, what are the needs of that particular group, and how do I meet all of those people's needs individually and collectively, and how do we make that work? And one of the things that social media does that I'm really excited about is it creates a mechanism or a vehicle for many-to-many communication. That I can, well, I'm going to go sit in this room for a while. I'm on a 12-step recovery support group online that, you know, I can spend a little time over here and talk with this group of people, and then, oh wow, this insight really helps me think about this relationship over here with this church that I'm working with, and then, hey, that helps me think about my involvement in political life and how I engage in that way. And so as human beings, we identify ourselves in many ways, right? We identify ourselves as members of families, as members of community groups. We're members of this Religion Communicators Council, right? And so one of the things that I think social media does so well is it allows us to be members of different groups or different tribes, and I still maintain a sense of my own personal identity in the midst of that, right? So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about in general in terms of social media, and I think in some ways you would have, I think, a lot more to teach me about those things. But in particular, I want to talk a little bit about the Twitter phenomenon and what happens there and how that works. I think there are some questions we have to ask about as professionals and as individuals. And I personally have, I've got my personal Twitter account, and then I've got another one for my professional. And if I work with an organization or an agency, I may start up a Twitter just for a particular campaign. We'll set up a Twitter feed just for that campaign. So what's the entity that you're trying to represent on Twitter? Is this just me as me, or is this me as this corporate entity? Corporations are people too, right? And so, am I doing this as a representative of this organization, or just talking by myself? And so, I think it's important to understand that raises the whole question of personal boundaries and privacy, which I think is also very important. It's a question of how much, how much do you want to share about your personal life or your private life? In some ways, I think people get kind of excited about that sense of connection. People tell me all the time, "Oh yeah, I heard you were over at Safe Haven. How'd you get?" "Oh, I was on your Facebook page." "Okay, cool." So you know where I'm at, but when was the last time we actually got a chance to talk to each other? I'm meeting my pastor for lunch tomorrow, and he said some similar things. "Oh yeah, I've been noticing you've been traveling a lot. Noticed on your Facebook page. It's good to see you again." So those are all questions we have to take a look at.